Well, let's get more reaction to the latest employment figures released this morning. Joining me now is Shadow Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Abena Opong Asari. Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. To start with, your reaction to these figures this morning, and what would Labour do if they were in power?
Good morning, Sally. So thank you for having me on your show. The figures that we're seeing at the moment shows that things are still difficult for people up and down the country, where households are, going to be hit by another energy price going up. So what Labour, Labour completely understands that people are facing the pinch right now, and so we've been calling for some time now a one-off windfall tax, which will go towards energy giants who are making huge profits during this particular period. And people really need that kind of support right now, particularly as we know that the energy price cap is going to go up in April. Another thing that we've been talking about is having a proper plan, which we haven't seen for 13 years under this Conservative government, in terms of making sure that people are properly supported, because as you've just shown, figures show that things are one of the worst in terms of where things have been for individuals up and down the country, and we're seeing constantly a sticking plaster being put forward by the government. We have plans to look at how by 2030 homes are insulated, about 90 million homes are properly insulated. I know through my casework, and I know through speaking to colleagues as well, that is the biggest thing that is that people really need right now, which is more better energy security as well.
Those are obviously those are long-term visions. What would you do about the more pressing issues of strikes and industrial action? The ONS figures this morning revealing the eye-watering impact of days lost to strike action last year. What would Labour do about that? How would you get people back to work and do a deal with the unions?
I think the first thing we need to look at is, why are these strikes happening? Why has the government failed to get around the table to have a conversation with those individuals, those members, to establish what is going on? I just feel that
the strikes are happening. The strikes are happening because people aren't getting the pay rises that they want. Would they get those pay rises under Labour?
So just to be very clear, the reason that a lot of this is happening is because the government isn't sitting around the table to come to a solution. If they sat around the table like Labour would do if we were in government, I do not believe that this would happen. We're seeing the data that this has happened under a Conservative government. You didn't see stuff like this happen when Labour was in government. And so what I'll do, what Labour will do when we're in government, if we're in government, is to sit around the table to look at the issues. But also, as well as that, is you were talking about the plans that I've put forward that Labour are talking about. Those long-term plans that we have put in place are things that are going to help make things a lot easier for individuals. And if the government had listened to us, particularly about implementing the windfall tax, I honestly do not think that we'll be in the situation that we are in right now, where we are seeing people having to make difficult decisions about going on strike because they are struggling.
OK, let's just move on, if I may, Abena. There's quite a few things I'd like to get through. So 3 in 4 councils are set to increase their council tax by a maximum of 5% from April. That's going to cost households significantly more each year, households that are already really struggling. What would Labour do about that?
I think the reality is, why are councils in this situation? I think that, unfortunately, councils are having to make really difficult decisions to be able to keep afloat. They're having to take on the work that the government really should be delivering, in terms of making sure that our economy is growing, making sure that people are able to prosper in the right and fair way. And unfortunately, what we've seen with this Conservative government, who've been in power for 13 years, is that we've seen money being lost to fraud, we've seen irresponsible decisions being made, and that is now being falling onto councils, where they're having to make difficult decisions. If we wouldn't be in this situation if the government had acted responsibly, if I'm going to be honest. I think it's a sad situation that we're in, where councils are now having to make a difficult situation. But I think we really shouldn't deflect away from how we're in this situation in the first place.
Okay. I'd like to just move on, if I may, to more international issues, not least the surveillance concerns regarding China. What would Labour do about this perceived threat now from China with these balloons flying around various airspaces?
I mean, the threat is really really concerning. I mean, the advice that we will be taking is to look at how we can make sure that the threat isn't as severe, which will be making sure that, particularly how the UK is not impacted in a negative way. We feel very important that we feel it's really important that we make sure that the UK is protected in a way that we're not affected in such a negative way. And so that's something that we'll be looking into and making sure that this could be reviewed.
Would Labour designate China a threat formally? And would you increase defence spending given the current climate?
I think it's difficult for me to say at this stage whether we're going to increase defence spending, because we don't know at this stage what we're going to be inheriting when we come into government. We'll have to look closely when we get closer to the election what's in the coffers before we make a decision as to whether to increase spending. But it is something that we'll certainly review definitely as we get closer to the election. But the threat is something that we are concerned about, and looking at how we can make sure that our country is more secure.
Now, we've got NATO defence ministers meeting today. Would Labour approve sending fighter jets to Ukraine?
I think this will be. I think we need to make sure and see what comes out of NATO. There needs to be a proper collaborative partnership work on this, particularly with NATO. We have to see what comes out of this meeting today, to see what discussions are put forward, what proposals are. Firstly, I want to say that my thoughts are with everybody in Ukraine. It's really sad that what I'm seeing happening across in Ukraine to individuals that are being affected, and I think that UK has been a good ally to Ukraine so far, and I think it's important that we remain as allies. But I also think it's really important we see what comes out of the NATO discussions before we make a jerk reaction as to what should be put forward.
Yeah, and certainly we may hear from NATO in terms of some sort of announcement later today. Abana Apongasari, it's been really good to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us.